Welcome. So today we have finished our series on oneness and duality, and I hope you enjoyed it. I did. And we're starting our series on dealing with difficulty and challenges. So given that series, I'm so grateful you're here, because that's not really an upper. But one thing I noticed, this is so funny, as I'm getting set to talk about unexpected difficulty and challenges, there are 4 batteries on my podium. What does that mean? This is a bad sign. I think it's Asha's way of reminding me that stuff happens. So, today we are going to start our series on the rocky road, dealing with challenges and difficulties. Next week, what we're going to talk about, as it's Independence Day weekend, we're going to talk about new beginnings. Because sometimes new beginnings can be a little rocky too. They can be unexpected. We don't know where they're going to end up. And that was certainly the situation when the United States started, because they didn't know how it was going to hang up, how it was going to end up. So it was one of those situations where I think the line was, we're all going to hang together or we're going to hang separately. So next week, is going to be New Beginnings. On July 10th, we are going to welcome back Kamal Karusu, who is going to speak about difficulties and challenges from an Islamic perspective. And on the 17th, we're going to have Jeannie Ward talk about the same topic. Jeannie, I'm so glad to see you. We're going to look forward to that. And then on the 24th, we're going to have another one of our discussions. Because, every now and then at the end of the series, we like to get together and share what we've learned, what we think, what some of the spiritual practices are that we use to overcome challenges and difficulties in our own lives. So please come back for that. That's going to be the 24th. We're just going to learn from each other. Because one of our premises here is the answers are not here, the answers are in the room. And on the 24th, we're going to harvest them. So, in thinking about life's difficulties, it kind of struck me starting off that modernity has not done us a whole lot of favors here. Because back when we were living in caves, or when we had just moved out of them, whenever something bad happened, what did we think? We thought that God was mad. Right? Wasn't that easy? God was mad, or the gods were mad. So what would we do? We would do something to placate God, we would sacrifice something, and then we would wait for things to kind of come back to normal. And when they didn't, we would just kind of cycle through the whole thing again. Now that was an easy way to think of it, but now we are modern men and women, and so we can't take that anymore. We can't accept that answer anymore. We look for other reasons. We look for more complex reasons. It's still, why me? The first question we always ask. But the answers are not as simple, unfortunately. So we have developed countless theories on why me. I love that why me, because last week I was having an experience and the whole day was why me. Until I finally woke up and I thought, well, why not me? Why should it be someone else? Am I immune? But in any event, we still ask, why me? So we come up with a lot of reasons. We still have the God is angry theory. We still have that. To teach me a lesson. Because I attracted this with my own thoughts, one of my personal favorites. We've talked about that before. God's will, bad luck. There are those of us who think it's just random stuff happening and there's no explanation at all. And there are many variants in between. We come up with all sorts of reasons for why bad things happen. And at the end of the day, we will take whatever explanation works for us, whatever fits into our faith tradition, but I am willing to believe that it is a mystery. As I was getting ready for this talk, you know that I do a lot of intensive research, which basically involves hitting Google. No, it's more than that. So, I would Google things like, why me, difficulty and challenge, and everybody I hit on, people I respect, would come up with, it's a mystery. We'll have to find this out later. It's like, when? I want to find it out now. I want an explanation now. Well, okay, the word sages tell us that it is a mystery. It's an answer that each of us has to find for himself or herself. But it's a question that we continue to ask. The human soul has a profound need to know why challenges arise, to know why these things have occurred in our lives. Dr. Viktor Frankl, and I know I've spoken about him in the past, he's the one who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, a wonderful book. He was a psychiatrist who was a survivor of the Nazi death camps. He wrote that the deepest of all human needs is the need to find meaning in our experiences. And actually, he developed the psychiatric practice of logotherapy, which is therapy based on finding meaning in your experiences. He felt that was the deepest need we had. If we can find meaning in what we are going through, then we can stand just about anything. And I think that is true. I have seen that in my own life, and I have seen it in the lives of others. Nietzsche wrote, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. And why is that? The why, it gives us understanding. It gives us a measure of peace. It gives us dignity in the midst of what we are going through. It gives us the strength to go on. We are amazing souls. We have resilience and reserve and strength that we can never even begin to grasp until we are in those circumstances. And we need that hook. We need that understanding. We need that why. So we ask ourselves why. And as I was thinking about this question, it kind of brought me back to our discussions of oneness and duality that we had in the last several weeks. I think they apply. If we are asking, just stay with me on this one, if we are asking why difficult circumstances exist, why has my life been derailed, why has this happened to me, it almost raises the premise that we should be exempt from life, that we alone should dodge the bullets that are zinging around all our friends. It raises the duality of good for me, bad for me, because we all go through life with the feeling that it's not going to happen to me. I remember reading a story about World War II soldiers. They were lined up to go into battle. They could have been lined up to hit the beaches on D-Day. I don't remember. Anyway, the sergeant looks at them and says, "Okay, guys, look to your left and look to your right. Chances are the guys on either side of you are not coming back." And all those soldiers looked to their left and they looked to their right and they all thought, "You poor bastard." It's like, okay, it's not going to be me. I remember when I started law school, all of us were in there, 300 of us, and the guy stood up, the dean stood up and said, "Okay, 90% of you are not going to be in the top 10. 10%, I thought, oh, those poor guys." Guess what? I'm not going to let you look at my transcript, but hey. I made that statement true. In a sense, the very question of why, creating this exception, creating this duality of good for me, bad for me, it just sets us up for loss. Because pleasure lost is pain experienced. We know this from our teachings on the Buddhist tradition. Pleasure and pain are both sides of the same teeter-totter. Pleasure lost is pain arisen. And asking sometimes the very question of why, or focusing on the very question of why, opens us up to that duality and to that pain. So, let's ask ourselves, how would this paradigm of difficulty and challenge shift if we looked at it through the eyes of oneness? If we looked at it through the eyes of the one, as we talked about last week, through the eyes of our divine self, through the eyes of our Christ consciousness, how would this paradigm change? I think we might release our assumptions of good and bad. We might release our assumptions of expected or unexpected. We would face any experience knowing that God is in it all. And that's the good news and the bad news. God is in it all, the good and the bad. When we go through good, we give thanks to Spirit for showering this good upon us. When the bad happens, we don't give thanks, but we know that Spirit is in it. We know that we are not alone. We are walking hand in hand, and we are always accompanied. We are beloved and supported throughout. It's like the song that Alma sang. My knees buckle, but I know I'm not going through it alone. Okay, now, this is very easy to say as I stand here. I'm well, I'm healthy, I have a place to live, I have a wife, I have kids. My life is just about as full as it can get. And so it's easy for me to stand up here and say, even in the midst of horrible challenges, God is with you and you are supported and there are opportunities for growth. Sometimes it's hard to do that. It's hard to say that, especially when the unexpected just kind of thwacks you in the head. The call comes in the middle of the night. The medical test comes back. You have that meeting that you knew you were going to be having with your boss, and you don't know what's coming next. It's easy to say that when it's not happening. It's so much harder to grasp it when it is. So how do we begin our journey down such a road? Because the rocky road is a road. It's not an event, it's a journey. How, when something like that happens, do we keep our heads up? Do we keep our legs going? Do we continue down that road? So, the good news is that we have the benefit of the wisdom of many way showers. Jesus, the Prophet Muhammad, Buddha, Lao Tzu, all those who have given us roadmaps. They've given us ways that they traversed those rocky roads. But the problem is, again, good news and bad news, the problem is that they are just maps. We have to take those roads ourselves. We walk down those roads ourselves, whatever map we have been given by others. Whatever the road is, rocky or smooth. So our walk is one in which we try to integrate those inevitable difficulties and challenges in our lives in a way that helps us, that enables us to preserve our happiness, to preserve our peace, to preserve our center, regardless of the turmoil and the noise that may be swirling around us. That is our goal as we begin this walk down the rocky road. If we do that, there is nothing that we cannot weather. As Mahagrosananda said, if we cannot be happy in spite of our difficulties, what good is our spiritual practice? Isn't that true? I mean, look at His Holiness the Dalai Lama. What does he say is the purpose of life? To be happy. This is a man who was booted out of his country, who had thousands of his countrymen killed by the Chinese. The man smiles nonstop, and he says the purpose of life is to be happy. I will take his word for it. And if we cannot do that, what is the purpose of our spiritual practices? So, let's ask ourselves, how do our practices help us to weather these changes? Whatever your spiritual practice is, and we spend a lot of time talking about what spiritual practices work for us. We've had discussions about it, and we tend to come back to sitting in the silence, to prayer, whatever your prayer tradition, whether it's Buddhist, whether it's beads, whether it's Keating centering prayer, whatever it is, your practice is designed to bring you close to God within, to help you connect to your source, to the light, to the energy that always shines through you, that does the work for you. We fall off the train when we think we are doing the work. We get back on track when we know that we are conduits, and we are relieved by the fact that Spirit is doing the work through us, and as us, and for us. So, whatever your spiritual practice, the first thing it does, I believe, is help us to be present to the experiences as we travel through the process. Remember how we talked about how important it was to be present, to be here, to be focused, to be now? Your spiritual practices enable you to do that. They enable you to take your mind off of all the horribles you conjure, all the eventualities you make up. What is it Mark Twain said, my life has been full of tragedy, few of which have ever happened? I mean, if you're like me, seriously, something happens and I am so good at catastrophizing it. I just do. I should write a book. You know, horrible things that may or may not ever happen, but who cares? I want to feel bad now. That works. So they enable us to stay present. They enable us to experience what exactly is going on. They help us to realize that what is happening is not a single event, but it is a transition. And better yet, it's a transition in which we participate. That's the good news. We are not victims here. We are co-creators of this experience. We are participants. From what is now, we participate in traveling to what is next. Our practices teach us that not only can we weather the storms, but we can emerge on the other side, deeper and wiser and stronger and more resilient and more compassionate. If we stick to our knitting, if we stick to our spiritual practices, even when it is so hard. So we begin with the awareness that life's transitions are a process. It matters how we approach these transitions. They're not just events that blam up and hit us in the face. They are journeys. We may not be able to control the events themselves, but we for sure control how we experience them. We have the opportunity to co-create these experiences. I came across a quote by Reverend Sidney, one of my teachers. She said, "We are not defined by the externals, but we define ourselves by how we internalize the externals." Isn't that great? We define ourselves by how we internalize the externals. That's very true, and I thank you for it. In her book, The Wisdom of No Escape, Pema Chodron gives a great example. She says that there can be an identical set of twins. Same mother, same father, same education, same house, same upbringing, same gifts, same experiences. One of those twins will use what she has been given to awaken, to grow, to prosper. The other twin, given the exact same stuff, will use what she has been given to grow small, to grow bitter, to grow resentful. What is the difference here? The difference is in how each processed it, how each saw it, how each experienced it. We have the choice. And that is one thing that we know in this community. It's a question of perception and choice. And that is one of the most liberating teachings that I know of. We always, whatever, have that choice. So in preparing this talk, I refer to a great book by Unity minister Robert Brummett called Finding Yourself in Transition. It's a great book. Right before this talk, I stuck in all these stickies. I am just making that up. Wow. Okay, it's a wonderful book. Finding Yourself in Transition, Using Life's Changes for Spiritual Awakening. He teaches, and I'll have a few to look at afterwards, he teaches that each transition involves 3 phases. And the gift to us comes in being aware of each phase as we navigate it. The first thing he talks about overall is trusting the process. We have to believe that there is a divine order, that there is a divine organization and energy behind the process. The transforming power of the transition process lies not in the arrival at a certain destination, but in participating fully in the journey. A transition is a journey. And that's not something we do a lot these days. When we're going from A to B, what do? We jump on a plane and we go from A to B. In the old days, we didn't. We journeyed. We would set out. Remember, I mean, it just boggles my mind. In the old days, actually I think before even I was born, but people would set out and you would not know if they were coming back. You might not hear from them for 5 years, if ever. They would just set off. They didn't know what the journey would entail. They didn't know if they would get there. They didn't know how they would get from A to B. They would just set off. We don't do that now. We are so sure we just jump on a plane and without any transition in between, we are here and next we are there. There is value in the journey. There is value in the transition. Look at the biblical story of the Israelites in Exodus. 40 years in the wilderness, traveling from Egypt to Canaan. They didn't become a nation when they got there. They became a nation during the transition, during the journey. A journey is a transformational time. And when we embark on it, we cannot know what it will look like. We just start, and as we go, we awaken, we unpack, we release what no longer serves us. Lao Tzu, author of the Tao Te Ching, wrote, "In the pursuit of learning, every day something is acquired. In the pursuit of the Tao, every day something is dropped." As we become wiser, we release, we abandon those things, we unpack which no longer serves us. You know, I've heard it said that knowledge is the acquisition of information. Wisdom is the letting go of that which we no longer need so that we can get to our true essence. A journey through life's transitions represents the opportunity to drop that unnecessary baggage that burdens you, whether it be an unnecessary identity, a perception of yourself, a judgment about others. It's a way to come face to face with the essence of who you are, with the meaning of your life, to deal with those questions that truly matter and drop those collateral things that don't. So what we find is we often don't get an opportunity to do that until profound challenges come up, because they shake us up. They move us off our path. They make us think maybe there's more. They make us look at some of these deeper questions. So each transition is going to begin with an ending, doesn't it? Each ending can feel like a death, a death to an old way of being, a death to an old way of living. But it's useful to kind of change our thinking on this because any growth requires change. Look at the cycle of nature. Any change requires death and rebirth to some extent. Remember that Jesus said to his disciples, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. So we need to change our thinking on this because endings are the cessation of something, but also the inevitable beginning of something else. And that may be true, and that's great to think of intellectually, but they shake us. They shake us up profoundly. Our faith, our belief in who we are, our place in the world, our identity, we can't see over that horizon. We don't know what's coming. We cannot fathom how the greater good will arise from this situation. However, if we can remain aware of our feelings, if we can continue with our practices, we are able to consider that spirit is the agent of the transformation we are just beginning, because we know that God is in it all. So we pass to the middle phase. Again, because we're us, we tend to think that we're going to go from the ending to the beginning, and we're wrong. There's a transition. The middle phase is what Brummett calls the void. Okay, that's kind of downer, the void. But it's a transitional phase. It's what others call neutral. It's the time the Israelites wandered. It's the Saturday that Jesus rested in the tomb. It's a time in which we may feel a sense of emptiness, a sense of lack of direction, a sense of lack of meaning. We are preoccupied with what was, we mourn what was, but we may have no idea what's coming next. We experience fear of loss, abandonment, a feeling of death. If you're a student of archetypes, if you're a reader of somebody like Joseph Campbell, you will have studied rites of passage, and you will know that the transition, or the void, is the phase in which the initiate has left his village, he's left his home, he's kind of wandering in search of a new identity, a new name, a new spirit, new guidance. So, what do we think about the transition phase? It can be an incredibly transformative time if we take advantage of it, and if we are aware that we are going through it. If we just wander around feeling, God, life stinks, I don't know what to do, that is not taking full advantage of this time. If we are aware that this is when things are changing, this is where the butterfly is being born, the chrysalis is growing and coming apart. This is a time of reflection, of transition, and of potential and imminent rebirth. So, what is another one of our teachings in these phases? We know that the feelings we have of lack of guidance, of fear, of separation, they are not permanent. There are seasons to our lives. And we know that this is a time when we are moving from one season into the next. We realize that our lives have meaning beyond what is over. We realize there is more to us than what has ended. It's frequently in this void that you come face to face with that understanding. Brummett writes that in the void, we have the opportunity to shed the old, what he calls husk, of the identity that we might have thought was us. Chinese poet Wu Ming-fu writes, the seed that is to grow must lose itself as seed. They that creep may graduate through chrysalis to wings. Wilt thou then, O mortal, cling to husks which falsely seem to you the self? I mean, think about it. What an opportunity this is. We have an opportunity to come up with a whole new sense of self, a whole new identity, if we remain aware as we transit the void. It can be an invaluable time of awakening and growth. So the third step, as we move out of the void, we begin to feel the stirrings of new beginnings. The previous two phases are essential, and this is the time when we know that something new is happening. Something new is being born in us. And the externals happen after the internals have already begun. So Brummett teaches that one of the best ways to prepare for a new beginning is to find what he calls your soul's deepest desire. Okay, I know what you're thinking. I don't have time for my deepest desire. I remember once somebody asked me what it was, I was being interviewed for something, and somebody asked me what it was I'd like to do. I sat there for 10 minutes. I have no idea what I'd like to do, because it seems like I never get to do what I like to do. but it's a good thing to consider. So Brummett writes about what is your soul's deepest desire, and he comes up with a great exercise, and I'm going to tell you what it is because I thought it was very cool. He says that you imagine that up until now, somebody has written the story of your life. Somebody has written the story of what your life has been, and it stops at this moment. It comes up to this moment. Your job is to write the rest of it. Think about that. The story has ended today, and your job is to write the rest of it. What would you be? Who would you be? What would your life be like? How would you spend your time? How would it end? It's a blank page, because all you have is what's gone before that someone else has written, and you get to create the rest. He says if you undertake to do this, don't be too specific about the particular results, because the best approach is to come up with a feeling of what you want it to feel like, the quality of the events that you want to have in your life, not the particular form it's going to take. You listen at this point for the guidance in you that might help you to learn what it is that you have as your soul's deepest desire. He said at one point in his life, everything had fallen apart. He had to just basically abandon all his attachments. He had to start again. He had no place to go. He was in the darkest place. So he sat and he said, okay, I'm going to listen for what God wants me to do. And he sat for weeks and nothing happened. And he was getting kind of irritated. And then all of a sudden, he heard a voice that said, well, what do you want to do? He's like, oh my God, why couldn't I have heard this weeks ago? You're wanting me to ask what I want to do. So this is how he came up with this exercise. You listen to your own heart. What are your gifts? What is it that you want to do? How do you want to structure the rest of your story? In Chinese, we know that the word crisis is formed by two characters. One is danger and one is opportunity. One translation is opportunity riding on a dangerous wind. Isn't that great? Challenge offers us both. Opportunity riding on a dangerous wind. They shake us up, they remove our smug certainty, but they also give us the opportunity, even when it's unwanted, to make a different and yet more meaningful future that we never would have made otherwise. So if we can use our individual spiritual practices to remain present through all the phases of these transitions, that is how we come out on the other side, deeper and wiser and gladder, perhaps even, that we may have gone through it. So let's keep that in mind, and let's take these thoughts into meditation.